The hallways of Westfield Academy of Music gleamed under the soft glow of evening lights. The polished wooden floors reflected the framed photographs that lined the walls, smiling faces of former students now playing in famous concert halls around the world. Even at this late hour, gentle melodies drifted from practice rooms where dedicated students worked to perfect difficult pieces. Eleanor stood in her classroom, sorting through sheet music with practiced hands. At 62, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had spent decades correcting others on proper form. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and small reading glasses perched on her nose as she organized the pieces for tomorrow's lessons. 23 years at Westfield had earned Eleanor both respect and fear. Parents fought to get their children into her roster, knowing her students often went on to prestigious music schools. Her methods were old-fashioned but effective, strict, demanding, and uncompromising. Excellence requires discipline, she often told concerned parents when their children came home crying. The clock on the wall showed nearly 8 in the evening. Most teachers had gone home hours ago, but Eleanor always stayed late on Thursdays to prepare for weekend recitals. She glanced at her watch and frowned. The cleaning staff should have finished the main areas by now. As if summoned by her thoughts, a soft knock came at the open door. A woman in a gray uniform stood there, cleaning cart beside her. "Excuse me?" the woman said quietly. "I need to clean this room now." Eleanor looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. She recognized the woman vaguely, one of the newer cleaning staff who'd started a few months ago. "I'll be done in 15 minutes, Eleanor replied, not bothering to hide her impatience. "You can come back then." The woman nodded and moved her cart further down the hall. Eleanor caught a glimpse of her name tag, Maria. Eleanor returned to her work but found herself distracted. There was something odd about that cleaner. Unlike most of the maintenance staff who chatted loudly in the hallways, this one moved almost silently. And Eleanor had noticed how the woman's eyes had lingered on the piano in the corner, not with the blank look of someone seeing just another object to dust, but with something that looked almost like longing. Shaking off the thought, Eleanor gathered her belongings. Westfield paid good money for its maintenance staff, but they weren't here to appreciate music. They were here to clean floors and empty trash cans. The following morning brought a flurry of students, parents, and activity. Eleanor's Friday schedule was always packed, with lessons scheduled back-to-back as families tried to fit in practice before the weekend. "Your posture is collapsing again." "Lily," Eleanor said, tapping her ruler against the music stand. The 12-year-old girl immediately straightened her shoulders. "Remember, a pianist must appear as disciplined as they sound." The girl nodded, her fingers poised above the keys again. Eleanor had high hopes for Lily. The child had natural talent and wealthy parents willing to invest in extra lessons and competitions. With the right guidance, she could be performing solo recitals within 2 years. "Again from the beginning," Eleanor instructed, "and mind the tempo in the third measure." As Lily played, Eleanor's thoughts drifted to the upcoming spring showcase. It was Westfield's most important annual event, where potential donors and music critics came to scout new talent. Eleanor had secured the closing spot for her star pupil, 16-year-old Thomas, but she was still debating which of her intermediate students deserved feature spots. The day wore on, lesson after lesson, with Eleanor making only brief stops for tea. By late afternoon, her voice had grown hoarse from constant correction and instruction. Her last student of the day was Thomas, tall and serious beyond his years. He arrived 10 minutes early as always, his sheet music already marked with notes from his personal practice sessions. "I've been working on the Beethoven," he said as he sat at the piano. "I think I've solved the problem with the left hand during the allegro." Eleanor nodded approvingly. This was why Thomas was her favorite. His dedication matched her own. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked through the piece measure by measure, Eleanor stopping him occasionally to suggest adjustments to his technique or interpretation. When they finished, she felt the deep satisfaction that came rarely in teaching, the knowledge that she was helping shape a truly exceptional talent. "You'll close the showcase with this?" she told him. "It's nearly perfect." Thomas smiled slightly, the highest form of celebration he allowed himself. "Thank you, Ms. Harwick." After he left, Eleanor remained in the classroom making notes for their next lesson. The building had grown quiet, most students and faculty gone for the weekend. Through her open door, she could hear the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner starting up in another wing. The cleaning staff would be making their rounds soon. Eleanor gathered her things, deciding to continue her work in the teacher's lounge rather than be interrupted again. As she walked down the hallway, she passed the school's largest practice room, the one with the expensive Steinway grand piano reserved for advanced students and faculty recitals. The door stood slightly ajar, though the lights were off inside. Eleanor paused, certain she had closed and locked it earlier that afternoon after Thomas had used it to warm up. A soft sound came from within. Not music exactly, but the gentle press of a single piano key, held down as if someone was testing its resistance. Then another note, equally tentative. Frowning, Eleanor pushed the door open wider. In the dim light spilling in from the hallway, she could make out a figure seated at the piano. Not a student. This person wore the gray uniform of the cleaning staff. "What do you think you're doing?" Eleanor demanded, her hand finding the light switch. Maria looked up, startled as the lights flooded the room. Her hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, standing up. "I was just dusting and That piano costs more than you make in a year," Eleanor cut in. "No one touches it without permission." Maria nodded, her eyes downcast. "It won't happen again." Eleanor noticed the cleaning cart in the corner, a duster and polish sitting on top. Perhaps the woman had been telling the truth about cleaning. Still, something didn't add up. The way Maria had been sitting, her posture had been perfect, her wrists positioned exactly as Eleanor taught her students. "Have you played before?" Eleanor found herself asking. Maria hesitated, then shrugged. "A little. Long time ago. Where?" "In my country. Before coming here." Maria's answers were clipped, her accent more pronounced now that she was nervous. Eleanor studied the woman more carefully. Maria appeared to be in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hands, Eleanor noticed, were strong and slender. Working hands, but not what she would have expected from someone who spent their days cleaning. "What country is that?" Eleanor pressed, curiosity getting the better of her. "It doesn't matter now," Maria replied, already turning back to her cart. "I clean here. That's all." There was something in her tone, a firmness that surprised Eleanor. Most of the maintenance staff were deferential to the point of invisibility around the teachers. "Well, just remember that the instruments are off limits," Eleanor said, her voice cooling again. "If you need to clean around them, find Mr. Rivera or another teacher to supervise." Maria nodded without looking up and began wiping down a nearby shelf. The conversation was clearly over. As Eleanor walked away, she felt oddly unsettled. There had been something in Maria's eyes when she'd been caught at the piano. Not just embarrassment, but a flash of something deeper. Loss, perhaps. Eleanor pushed the thought aside. She had more important things to worry about than the hobbies of cleaning staff. The spring showcase was just 6 weeks away, and she still had dozens of details to arrange. By Monday morning, she had forgotten the incident entirely. The week began with its usual rhythm of lessons, practice sessions, and faculty meetings. Eleanor threw herself into preparations for the showcase, drilling her students with even more intensity than usual. It wasn't until Thursday evening that she saw Maria again. Eleanor was working late as usual, and when she stepped into the hallway to fetch some papers from the copy room, she noticed the cleaning cart outside one of the smaller practice rooms. The door to the room was closed, but as Eleanor passed, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks. Music. Not the hesitant pressing of keys she'd witnessed before, but actual music, Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, played with the kind of emotional depth that Eleanor rarely heard even from her advanced students. Silently, Eleanor approached the door and opened it just enough to peer inside. Maria sat at the piano, eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced precision, her body swaying slightly with the emotional crescendos of the piece. The cleaning cart stood forgotten in the corner as she played, her gray uniform incongruous against the beauty of the sound she was creating. Eleanor watched in stunned silence, unable to reconcile what she was seeing with what she knew, or thought she knew, about the quiet woman who emptied the trash cans and mopped the floors after hours. This was no amateur who had played a little once upon a time. This was someone with years of classical training and natural talent, the kind of musician who belonged on stage, not pushing a cleaning cart. For several minutes, Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, listening as Maria finished the nocturne and seamlessly transitioned into a Schubert impromptu. It was only when Maria opened her eyes during a particularly challenging passage that she noticed she wasn't alone. Her hands crashed down on the keys in a discordant shock of sound. "Ms. Harwick, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I specifically told you the instruments were off limits." Maria's hands fell away from the piano keys as if they'd suddenly turned to ice. The beautiful melody that had filled the room seconds earlier was replaced by a heavy silence. "I asked you a question," Eleanor said, stepping fully into the practice room. "What do you think you're doing?" Maria stood up from the bench, her face flushed. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have." "That's right, you shouldn't have," Eleanor cut in. "These instruments are valuable and for student use only. I made that perfectly clear last week." "Yes, you did." Maria's voice was quiet but not meek. She gestured toward her cleaning cart. "I finished early tonight. I thought maybe just a few minutes." Her voice trailed off. Eleanor crossed her arms. "This is not what we pay you for. Please stick to sweeping and dusting, that's what you're here for." The words came out harsher than Eleanor had intended, but she didn't retract them. Rules existed for a reason. If she allowed the cleaning staff to use the pianos, what would be next? The instruments needed to be protected. Maria nodded once, her face composed into an expressionless mask. "It won't happen again." She turned to her cart and began gathering her cleaning supplies. Eleanor stood there, feeling an unexpected twinge of something that might have been guilt. The nocturne had been played beautifully, far beyond the level of someone who had only dabbled in piano. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop herself. Maria paused, her back still turned. "It doesn't matter now." "It does if you're using our facilities without permission," Eleanor pressed. "Were you professionally trained?" For a moment, Eleanor thought Maria wouldn't answer. Then the woman turned, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly for the first time. "Yes, I was trained. A long time ago. In another life." There was a dignity in her voice that caught Eleanor off guard. "But as you said, that's not what I'm paid for here." With those words, Maria pushed her cart past Eleanor and into the hallway, leaving the teacher alone in the practice room. Eleanor found herself staring at the piano keys where Maria's fingers had been. She had taught piano for over 20 years, worked with hundreds of students, many of them genuinely talented. But what she had heard moments ago, there had been something special there. Not just technical skill, but that rare quality that separated true artists from merely competent players. Shaking her head, Eleanor gathered her own belongings and locked the practice room. Whatever Maria's story was, it wasn't her concern. The woman had broken the rules, and that was that. The following morning brought a crisis that pushed all thoughts of the janitor from Eleanor's mind. Her phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Thomas's mother, her voice tight with worry. "He's been up all night with a fever," she explained. "The doctor says it's a nasty flu. He won't be able to practice, let alone perform, for at least 2 weeks. Eleanor felt her stomach sink. Thomas was her star student, set to close the spring showcase in just 6 weeks. Has he started on the antibiotics yet? "It's viral, Ms. Harwick. There's nothing they can do except wait it out." After reassuring Thomas's mother that they would work something out, Eleanor hung up and stared at her calendar. 6 weeks was not much time to prepare another student for the showcase finale. Lily was talented but not ready for the spotlight. And the piece she had selected for Thomas, Beethoven's Appassionata, was far too difficult for any of her other students to master in such a short time frame. By the time Eleanor arrived at Westfield that morning, she had convinced herself that Thomas would recover quickly. Young people bounced back fast. Surely he would be well enough to perform. Her hopes were dashed at the weekly faculty meeting. Dean Richards brought up the showcase almost immediately. "I've heard that Thomas Peterson is ill," he said, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concern. "Will this affect our program?" Eleanor straightened in her chair. "Thomas has a touch of flu. I'm confident he'll recover in plenty of time." "My understanding is that it's quite serious," the dean persisted. "His mother called the office this morning to withdraw him from the showcase entirely." A murmur went through the faculty. Eleanor felt a rush of heat rise to her face. Why hadn't Thomas's mother told her this? "We have several university representatives and critics attending specifically to hear Thomas," the dean continued. We need to find a suitable replacement and quickly. I can prepare another student, Eleanor said, though her mind raced through her roster without finding an obvious candidate. Perhaps we should consider asking Professor Chen to have his student close the program instead, suggested the choir director. I heard young Philip play last month and he's quite remarkable. Eleanor stiffened. Philip was indeed talented, but he was not her student, and the showcase finale had been hers to fill for the past 15 years. That won't be necessary, she said firmly. I'll have a replacement ready. The dean gave her a skeptical look but nodded. Very well. Please let me know who it will be by Monday so we can update the program. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lessons and worry. Eleanor pushed her students harder than usual, searching for hidden potential she might have overlooked. By evening, her throat was sore from constant correction, and her patience had worn thin. She was just packing up to leave when Dean Richards appeared in her doorway. Eleanor, do you have a moment? She nodded, though the last thing she wanted was another conversation about the showcase. I've been thinking about your situation with Thomas, he said, settling into a chair across from her desk. It's unfortunate timing, to be sure. I'll find a replacement, Eleanor said stiffly. I'm sure you will. The dean paused. But I had an interesting conversation today that might offer another solution. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, waiting. I was speaking with Rivera, you know, the head of maintenance. Apparently one of his staff has quite an extraordinary background. The dean leaned forward. She was a concert pianist in her home country, trained at the National Conservatory there, and performed with their symphony orchestra for years. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. You're talking about the cleaning woman, Maria. The dean nodded, looking pleased that she knew. Yes, Maria Suarez. Rivera told me she fled during the political upheaval there last year. Her credentials aren't recognized here, so she's been working whatever jobs she can find. And how did Rivera discover this hidden talent? Eleanor asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Apparently, she mentioned her background when she was hired, but no one paid much attention until Rivera overheard her playing in one of the practice rooms after hours. The dean gave her a pointed look. He says she's extraordinary. Eleanor's mind flashed back to the nocturne she had heard, the emotional depth, the technical precision. So what exactly are you suggesting, Dean Richards? I'm suggesting that we consider having her perform at the showcase. Not as the finale, perhaps, but you want to put a janitor on stage at our most prestigious event of the year? Eleanor couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. The dean frowned. I want to put a trained classical pianist on stage. The fact that she currently cleans our floors is irrelevant to her ability. It's completely inappropriate, Eleanor insisted. We have no verification of her training or experience. And what message would it send to our students who have worked all year for a chance to perform? It would send the message that we recognize talent wherever we find it. The dean replied evenly. But I can see you're not comfortable with the idea. It was merely a suggestion. After he left, Eleanor sat at her desk seething. The very thought was absurd. Westfield wasn't a charity. It was a prestigious institution with standards to maintain. She gathered her belongings with sharp, angry movements. As she made her way down the hallway, she heard piano music again, this time from the main recital hall. The piece was Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding works in the repertoire. It was being played flawlessly. Eleanor followed the sound, already knowing what she would find. The recital hall doors were open, the lights on full. Maria sat at the grand piano on stage, completely absorbed in the music. But this time she wasn't alone. Dean Richards stood to one side, watching with undisguised admiration. Next to him was Mr. Rivera and two other teachers Eleanor recognized from the music faculty. She hung back in the doorway, unwilling to join the impromptu audience but unable to tear herself away from the performance. Maria's hands moved across the keyboard with astonishing speed and precision, making the notoriously difficult piece look almost easy. When she reached the final notes, the small group burst into applause. Maria looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten they were there. Her eyes met Eleanor's across the room, and for a moment something passed, unsaid between them. Recognition, perhaps, or challenge. Dean Richards turned and spotted Eleanor. Perfect timing. Come in, Eleanor. You should hear what Ms. Suarez can do. Reluctantly, Eleanor stepped into the recital hall. I've heard her play, she said coolly. Then you understand why I think she deserves a spot in our showcase, the dean replied. Ms. Suarez was just telling us about her background. She was the featured soloist with the National Symphony in her country for 5 seasons before coming here. Eleanor looked at Maria, who stood now beside the piano, her cleaner's uniform incongruous against the glossy black instrument. "Is that true?" Eleanor asked her directly. Maria held her gaze. "Yes, I was a pianist. Now I clean." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a simple statement of fact. For the first time, Eleanor felt a grudging respect for the woman. "Ms. Suarez has agreed to play for us at the showcase," Dean Richards announced. "Not as a replacement for Thomas, but as a special guest performer. I think our audience will be quite impressed." Eleanor felt her face flush. So it was decided without her input at all. 23 years of building Westfield's reputation, and now they were putting a custodian on stage based on an impromptu audition. "If you'll excuse me," Eleanor said stiffly, "I have work to do." As she turned to leave, Maria's voice stopped her. "Ms. Harwick, I would like your approval too." Eleanor turned back, surprised. "My approval? Yes, this is your school. Your showcase. I don't wish to perform if you object." The others looked uncomfortable, clearly not having expected this condition. Eleanor studied Maria's face, searching for mockery or challenge, but found only sincerity. "Play something else," Eleanor said suddenly. "Not Liszt or Chopin. Something personal." Without hesitation, Maria returned to the piano. After a moment of thought, she began to play a piece Eleanor didn't recognize. Something haunting and beautiful, with echoes of folk melodies woven through complex harmonies. When the last notes faded, Eleanor asked quietly, "What was that?" "Something from my country," Maria replied. "I composed it after I left. It's called What Remains." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock. My classroom. If you're serious about performing, we have work to do." At precisely 8 o'clock Monday morning, Maria knocked on the door of Eleanor's classroom. She wore her gray uniform, having come straight from her night shift. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she stood straight, a folder of sheet music clutched in her hands. Eleanor looked up from her desk. "You're punctual. That's a start." "I haven't slept," Maria admitted. "My shift ended at 6, Eleanor frowned. "That's hardly ideal for practice. How do you expect to prepare properly if you're exhausted?" Maria shrugged slightly. "I've worked with less sleep before." She placed her folder on the piano. "I brought the pieces I'm considering. But if you have suggestions..." Eleanor stood and crossed to the piano. "Let me see." The folder contained well-worn sheet music, the pages dog-eared and marked with penciled notes in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. She flipped through them. Rachmaninoff, Bach, Debussy, Schubert. Advanced repertoire, all of it. "These are all quite challenging," Eleanor said, not bothering to hide her surprise. "Yes." Maria's reply was matter-of-fact. "I've performed each of them before." Eleanor studied the woman more carefully. In the bright morning light, Maria looked older than Eleanor had first thought. Mid-40s perhaps, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes and strands of gray in her dark hair. Her hands, though clean, showed the effects of harsh cleaning chemicals and hard work. "How long has it been since you performed professionally?" Eleanor asked. 14 months. Since I left my country." "And why did you leave?" The question was personal, perhaps too much so. But Eleanor needed to understand who exactly she was dealing with. Maria was quiet for a moment. "Because staying meant choosing between my conscience and my safety." She didn't elaborate further. Eleanor nodded, deciding not to press. "Dean Richards seems convinced of your abilities, but I need to hear for myself what you can do. Not just technically, but interpretively." She selected Bach's Prelude and Fugue in G minor from the folder. "Start with this, for the next hour." Eleanor put Maria through her paces, Bach, then Debussy. Then the challenging third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Maria played without hesitation, her technique solid despite her obvious fatigue. More impressive to Eleanor was her musicality, the way she breathed life into each piece, finding nuances even Eleanor hadn't considered. When Maria finished the Beethoven, Eleanor sat in silence for several moments, reassessing her assumptions. This woman wasn't merely good for someone who cleaned floors. She was genuinely exceptional. "You play well," Eleanor finally said, the understatement deliberate. "But the showcase is in less than 6 weeks and you're out of practice. Your Bach was technically sound but lacked color. The Beethoven was rushed in the arpeggios." Maria nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. I have no piano at home to practice on. Eleanor closed the folder of music. We need to arrange practice time for you here, and you'll need appropriate attire for the performance. The uniform won't do. I understand. I have classes all day, but the practice room at the end of the hall is usually empty after 4. You can use it for 2 hours before your shift begins. Eleanor paused. I'll speak to Rivera about adjusting your schedule. Something like surprise flickered across Maria's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Eleanor warned. This will be difficult. 6 weeks isn't much time, and my standards are high. I know. A small smile touched Maria's lips. The students talk about you in the hallways when they think no one is listening. They say you're the toughest teacher, but also the best. Eleanor felt an unexpected warmth at the words. Yes, well, we'll meet again tomorrow morning. Bring the Rachmaninoff this time. As Maria gathered her music, Eleanor added, and Maria, get some sleep. A tired pianist is a sloppy pianist. After Maria left, Eleanor sat at her desk thoughtful. She'd agreed to this arrangement to maintain control over the situation, but now she found herself genuinely intrigued. Who exactly was this woman who cleaned their floors by night and played Bach by morning? Eleanor's phone interrupted her thoughts. It was Dean Richards. I trust your meeting with Ms. Suarez went well, he asked without preamble. She has potential, Eleanor allowed. Excellent. I've taken the liberty of adding her to the showcase program. She'll play just before the intermission. Eleanor frowned. That's traditionally when we feature our advanced students. Yes, and I'm sure they'll understand this unique circumstance, the dean replied smoothly. This could be wonderful publicity for the school, Eleanor. Imagine the story. Political refugee, concert pianist reduced to cleaning floors, discovered and brought back to the stage by Westfield Academy. The press will love it, Eleanor's frown deepened. She's not a publicity stunt. She's a musician. Of course, the dean backtracked quickly. I simply meant it's a compelling narrative. Good for her, good for us. After hanging up, Eleanor sat for a long while, troubled by the conversation. She'd initially opposed Maria's performance out of snobbery. A cleaner didn't belong on their stage. Now she found herself opposing the dean's enthusiasm for the opposite reason. Maria deserved better than to be turned into a heartwarming news story. The irony wasn't lost on her. Over the next 2 weeks, a strange routine developed. Each morning before classes, Eleanor worked with Maria for an hour. In the afternoons, Maria practiced alone in the empty classroom, and in the evenings she cleaned the same rooms where she had played hours earlier. Eleanor kept their sessions focused and professional, but her curiosity about Maria grew. Bit by bit, through casual comments and brief exchanges, she began piecing together the woman's story. Maria had been a child prodigy, training at the National Conservatory from age 7. By 20, she was performing internationally. She had taught at the conservatory while maintaining her career as a soloist and orchestra pianist. She had a husband once, also a musician, but he had died 5 years earlier. No children. Then the political situation in her country had deteriorated. The new regime viewed artists and intellectuals with suspicion. Those who didn't toe the party line found themselves blacklisted or worse. I conducted a memorial concert, Maria explained one morning as she massaged her wrist during a break, for students who disappeared after the protests. After that, my passport was revoked, my position terminated. A former student helped me leave the country. Eleanor listened without comment, but the story affected her more than she let on. She thought of her own comfortable life, her secure position, her freedom to teach and perform without fear of persecution. She'd worked hard for her accomplishments, certainly, but she'd never faced the kind of hardships Maria had endured. By the 3rd week, Eleanor had to admit that Maria was making remarkable progress. The woman practiced with a dedication that put most of Eleanor's students to shame, often staying well into the evening until her shift began. You need a better piano at home, Eleanor said one morning after listening to Maria play through the Rachmaninoff she'd selected for the showcase. Practicing only here isn't enough, Maria shook her head. My apartment is too small, and too expensive already. That afternoon, Eleanor made a call to a former student who owned a music store in the city. By the following Monday, a digital piano with weighted keys had been delivered to the school. On loan, Eleanor explained when Maria protested, though she had in fact paid for it herself. You can keep it in the storage room off the main hallway. No one uses it, and you can practice there during your breaks. Maria stared at the piano, then at Eleanor, her expression unreadable. Why are you helping me like this? The question caught Eleanor off guard. Because talent deserves nurturing, she said finally, even when it comes in unexpected packages. As the weeks passed, word spread throughout the school about the cleaner who was preparing to perform in the showcase. Students began lingering in the hallways when Maria practiced, listening through the door. Several of Eleanor's colleagues stopped by her classroom to inquire about her new protégé, a term that made Eleanor bristle, though she couldn't quite say why. Thomas, recovered from his illness, returned to school and took the news of his replacement with surprising grace. I heard her playing yesterday, he told Eleanor during his lesson. The Rachmaninoff. She's better than I am. She's been playing professionally since before you were born, Eleanor reminded him. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Will she be teaching here next year? The question startled Eleanor. The possibility hadn't occurred to her. Maria, with her training and experience, was certainly qualified, far more so than some of their newer faculty. But the idea of the cleaner becoming a colleague was still strange to contemplate. I don't know, she answered honestly. 2 weeks before the showcase, an unexpected crisis emerged. Eleanor arrived at school to find Maria waiting outside her classroom, face pale. I can't perform, she said as soon as Eleanor unlocked the door. What? Why not? Maria held up her hands. The skin was red and raw, with painful-looking cracks across the knuckles and palms. Chemical burn, she explained. New cleaning product. I didn't wear gloves. Eleanor took Maria's hands in her own, examining the damage with dismay. The showcase was only 14 days away, and Maria needed to practice now more than ever. But playing with her hands in this condition would be painful at best, impossible at worst. Come with me, Eleanor said, making a sudden decision. She led Maria to her car and drove to a dermatologist she knew, an expensive specialist whose daughter had once been Eleanor's student. She needs treatment immediately, Eleanor told the receptionist. Her hands are her livelihood. The doctor examined Maria's hands with concern. This is a severe reaction. You'll need prescription ointment, and these hands must stay away from chemicals completely for at least 2 weeks. She's performing in the spring showcase at Westfield Academy, Eleanor said. In 14 days. She needs to be able to play. The doctor looked skeptical. I'll do what I can, but no guarantees. And she definitely can't work with cleaning products until this heals. On the drive back to the school, Maria was quiet. Finally, she said, I can't take time off work. I need the money. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'll speak with Dean Richards and Rivera. We'll figure something out. But she already knew what needed to happen, and later that afternoon she called Maria to her classroom. I've spoken with the administration. You're on paid leave from your cleaning duties until after the showcase. Maria's eyes widened. Paid leave? They agreed to that? Eleanor looked away. Let's just say arrangements have been made. The important thing is that your hands heal and you can practice. I've adjusted my schedule to give you more supervised practice time. What Eleanor didn't say was that the arrangement involved her personally covering Maria's salary during her absence. It was worth it, she told herself. The integrity of the showcase was at stake. But as the days passed and Eleanor spent more time with Maria, she had to admit that her motivations had changed. It wasn't about the showcase anymore, or about proving anything to Dean Richards or her colleagues. It was about music, pure and simple, and about giving a gifted artist the chance to be heard again. The day before the spring showcase, Westfield Academy hummed with nervous energy. Students rushed through hallways with instruments and sheet music. Teachers posted final rehearsal schedules, and parents delivered garment bags containing performance clothes. In the back practice room, Maria sat at the piano, eyes closed, running through her piece one last time. Her hands, though still faintly pink from the chemical burns, had healed enough to play without pain. The prescribed ointment and 2 weeks away from cleaning supplies had worked wonders. Eleanor stood by the window, listening intently. When Maria finished, she offered only one comment. The cadenza in the third movement, you're rushing it slightly. Remember to breathe. Maria nodded and played the passage again, slower this time, with more space between the notes. The difference was subtle but significant. Better, Eleanor approved. Much better. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dean Richards peered in, his round face flushed with excitement. I hope I'm not disturbing your practice, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care if he was. I just wanted to let you know we're expecting quite a turnout tomorrow. Several music critics have confirmed they're coming, and the local newspaper is sending a reporter. He beamed at Maria. Your story has generated quite a bit of interest. Eleanor frowned. Dean Richards, Ms. Suarez, is focused on her performance right now, not publicity. Of course, he said quickly. But I thought she'd be pleased to know people are eager to hear her play. He turned to Maria. The reporter may want a brief interview after the showcase. Nothing too invasive, just your background, how you came to Westfield, that sort of thing. Maria looked uncomfortable. I prefer to let my playing speak for itself. Well, we can discuss it tomorrow. The dean checked his watch. I should let you get back to practice. Big day tomorrow. After he left, Maria sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap. You don't have to speak to any reporters if you don't want to, Eleanor told her. Your obligation is to play, nothing more. It's not that. Maria stared at the keys. I'm not used to attention anymore. For so long I've tried to be invisible. It was safer that way. Eleanor pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Are you still concerned about your safety? Even here? Maria shrugged. Old habits. My country's government has a long reach. The dean doesn't need to know your full story, Eleanor said firmly. Neither does any reporter. You're a musician performing at a school event. That's all anyone needs to know. Maria nodded gratefully. Thank you. After a pause, she asked, Will you be at the rehearsal tonight? Of course. I'll be in the back of the hall. Eleanor stood up. Now go home and rest. No more practicing today. Your hands need recovery time, and so does your mind. That evening, the dress rehearsal ran smoothly, with only minor technical issues to resolve. Maria, dressed simply in black pants and a borrowed blue blouse, played her piece flawlessly. Watching from the shadows at the back of the hall, Eleanor felt an unfamiliar surge of pride. This woman, who had lost everything and started over in the humblest of positions, was about to remind everyone what true artistry sounded like, and Eleanor had helped make it happen. As the rehearsal ended, students and faculty drifted toward the exits, chatting excitedly about the next day. Eleanor gathered her notes and was about to leave when she noticed a man she didn't recognize standing in the lobby, studying the printed program. Something about him, his stiff posture, his too formal suit, made her pause. He wasn't a parent or a regular community member. She would have recognized him. When he looked up and scanned the departing crowd with sharp eyes, Eleanor felt a chill. Without quite knowing why, she hurried backstage where Maria was gathering her sheet music. Do you have a ride home? Eleanor asked. Maria looked up, surprised by the question. I usually take the bus. Why? I'll drive you tonight. It's late and you should save your energy for tomorrow. In the car, Eleanor debated whether to mention the stranger. She didn't want to alarm Maria unnecessarily, especially before her performance, but something about the man had unsettled her deeply. There was someone in the lobby I didn't recognize, she said finally as they drove, watching people leave. He seemed out of place. Maria's hands tightened in her lap. What did he look like? Middle-aged. Dark suit, very formal. Not American, I don't think. Maria was silent for a long moment. It could be nothing, she said finally, though her voice had lost its warmth. That's what I thought, Eleanor agreed. But I wanted you to know. When they reached Maria's apartment building, a plain brick structure in a modest neighborhood, Eleanor insisted on walking her to the door. The building was dark and quiet, with no sign of anything unusual. Thank you for the ride, Maria said, keys in hand. And for everything else. Lock your door, Eleanor told her. I'll pick you up at 9 tomorrow morning. Eleanor slept poorly that night, troubled by vague worries. By morning, though, her concerns seemed overblown. The man had probably been a parent or a community member she simply hadn't met before. Westfield hosted many events throughout the year. She couldn't possibly know everyone who attended. She picked Maria up as promised, noting with approval that the woman appeared rested and calm. She wore a simple black dress, new, Eleanor suspected, purchased specifically for today, and had styled her hair more carefully than usual. Nervous? Eleanor asked as they drove toward the school. No, Maria replied, and Eleanor believed her. When you've played for government officials who could have you arrested if they disliked your performance, a school showcase seems manageable. Eleanor laughed despite herself. I suppose it would. The backstage area was chaotic when they arrived, full of young performers adjusting bow ties and hairpins, parents offering last-minute advice, and teachers attempting to establish order. Maria found a quiet corner and sat with her sheet music, seemingly untouched by the nervous energy around her. Eleanor checked on her other students, most of whom were performing in the first half of the program. Lily in particular seemed on the verge of panic, convinced she would forget her piece halfway through. "You've practiced it 100 times," Eleanor reminded her. "Your fingers know what to do even if your mind goes blank. Just keep playing." The auditorium filled quickly, and at exactly noon the showcase began. One by one, Eleanor's students took the stage, some playing confidently, others with visible nervousness. The audience applauded politely after each performance, with proud parents snapping photos despite the no photography signs posted throughout the hall. Maria was scheduled to perform just before intermission. As her turn approached, Eleanor made her way backstage again, wanting to check on her one last time. She found Maria standing alone near the stage entrance, watching the current performer, a young violinist. When Eleanor approached, Maria turned, her expression unreadable. "He's here," she said quietly. "Who?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew. "The man you saw last night. He's sitting near the back on the aisle." Maria's voice was steady, but her hands, Eleanor noticed, were clenched at her sides. "He works for my government." I recognized him. Eleanor felt a cold rush of fear. "Are you sure? Could it be someone who just looked similar?" "I'm sure," Maria said. "He attended many of my concerts back home. Always in the same seat, always watching. Not for the music," Eleanor's mind raced. "We should call the police," Maria shook her head. "And tell them what?" "That a man from my country is attending a public concert. He hasn't done anything illegal. But if you're in danger—" "I've been in danger since I left," Maria interrupted, a trace of bitterness in her voice. "I just didn't expect it to find me here, in a school playing piano again." She took a deep breath. "I should go. Leave now before he sees me." Eleanor grabbed her arm. "No, absolutely not. You don't understand. I understand that you're a musician," Eleanor said firmly. "And in 10 minutes you're going to go on that stage and play. That's what you do. That's who you are." Maria stared at her, conflict clear in her eyes. "If you run now," Eleanor continued, "you'll never stop running. You'll never play in public again. Is that what you want?" Slowly, Maria shook her head. "Then play," Eleanor said simply. "Play as if he isn't there. Play for everyone else in that audience who came to hear music, not to intimidate or threaten." The violinist finished his piece, and applause filled the hall. The stage manager appeared, clipboard in hand. "Miss Suarez, you're up next." Maria took a deep breath and nodded. As she moved toward the stage, Eleanor caught her hand. "Remember," she said quietly, "the music matters more than fear." Maria squeezed her hand once, then walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was polite but curious. Many in the audience had heard rumors about the cleaning woman who was supposedly a concert pianist. Eleanor slipped into the auditorium and stood at the back, her eyes darting to the man Maria had identified. He sat stiffly in his seat, his attention fixed on the stage with an intensity that seemed out of place among the parents and community members. Maria took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she sat motionless, eyes closed, gathering herself. The audience grew still, waiting. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall, gentle at first, then building in intensity. Though there was no orchestra to accompany her, Maria played with such richness and depth that the missing instruments were hardly noticed. From the first phrase, it was clear to everyone in the hall that they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not a student performance or even a talented amateur. This was mastery, the kind that comes from decades of training, performing, and living with music. Eleanor watched the audience as much as she watched Maria. Restless children grew still. Parents who had been checking watches or phones looked up, their attention captured. Even the stern-faced man seemed affected, his expression softening almost imperceptibly as the music swelled. By the time Maria reached the famous second movement, with its lush romantic melody, the atmosphere in the hall had transformed. There was a collective holding of breath, a shared moment of beauty that transcended language and background and politics. Eleanor glanced again at the man in the dark suit. He was leaning forward now, his eyes never leaving Maria's hands as they moved across the keyboard. Was it Eleanor's imagination, or had his rigid posture relaxed slightly? As the final movement built toward its powerful conclusion, Eleanor felt a strange mix of emotions: pride in Maria's talent, anger at the circumstances that had brought her here, and something else she couldn't quite name, something that felt uncomfortably like affection. Maria struck the final chord, the sound resonating through the hall. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence. Then the audience erupted. The applause seemed to go on forever. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as Maria sat at the piano, her head bowed slightly, overwhelmed by the response. When she finally stood and offered a modest bow, the audience's enthusiasm only increased. Eleanor watched from the back of the hall, her throat tight with emotion. She glanced again at the man in the dark suit. He remained seated while those around him stood, but he was applauding, his eyes never leaving Maria. After taking 2 more bows, Maria left the stage. The house lights came up, signaling intermission, and the audience began to move toward the lobby, their excited chatter filling the air. Eleanor hurried backstage, pushing past students and parents to find Maria. She discovered her in a quiet corner, leaning against a wall, eyes closed, breathing deeply. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked. Maria opened her eyes and smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually serious face. "Yes, better than all right." "You were magnificent," Eleanor told her, the words inadequate for what she had just witnessed. Everyone could see it. "Including him," Maria said, her smile fading slightly. "He's still here. I saw him watching." Before Eleanor could respond, they were surrounded by faculty members and students, all eager to congratulate Maria. Dean Richards pushed his way to the front, beaming as if Maria's success was entirely his doing. "Absolutely extraordinary," he gushed, shaking Maria's hand vigorously. "I knew you were talented, but that was world-class." And the reporter from the Times was absolutely captivated. "He wants to interview you right away." Maria shot a questioning look at Eleanor, who stepped forward. "Ms. Suarez needs a few moments to herself first," she said firmly. "Perhaps after the showcase is complete." The dean looked disappointed but nodded. Of course. But don't disappear after the final performance. This is a wonderful opportunity for publicity." As the crowd around them dispersed, Eleanor noticed Thomas hanging back, waiting patiently. When the others had gone, he approached Maria with genuine admiration in his eyes. "That was amazing," he said simply. "I've never heard the Rachmaninoff played like that, not even in recordings." Maria thanked him with gentle grace. "Your teacher tells me you're very talented yourself." Thomas shrugged, suddenly shy. "I work hard, but I've never played like you just did." "That comes with time," Maria assured him, "and life. Sometimes the hardest experiences give music its depth." After Thomas left to prepare for his own performance in the second half, Eleanor touched Maria's arm. "We should talk about what happens after the showcase." "About that man?" Maria nodded. "Yes, but not now. The students deserve their moment too. I'll wait in the green room until the end, and then we can decide what to do." Eleanor reluctantly agreed, though she didn't like the idea of Maria sitting alone with her fears while the showcase continued. "I'll check on you between performances," she promised. The second half of the showcase proceeded without Maria, but her performance had set a new standard. The student pianists who followed seemed especially nervous, aware that they were playing for an audience that had just heard mastery. Eleanor did her best to focus on her students, offering encouragement and last-minute advice, but her thoughts kept returning to Maria. During a string quartet performance, she slipped out to the green room. Maria sat exactly where Eleanor had left her, reading through the remainder of the program. "Everything all right?" Eleanor asked. "Yes, I've been thinking." Maria set the program aside. "About what you said before I went on stage, that if I ran now, I'd never stop running." Eleanor nodded, remembering her own words. "You were right," Maria continued. "I've been running for over a year, hiding who I am, what I can do. Today, for the first time since I left my country, I felt like myself again." Before Eleanor could respond, a stagehand appeared at the door. "Ms. Harwick? The Pachelbel Cannon Group is finishing up. Thomas is next, and he's asking for you." Eleanor hesitated, torn between her student and Maria. "Go," Maria told her. "He needs you now. We can talk later." Reluctantly, Eleanor left to find Thomas, who was pacing nervously backstage. "I can't follow her," he blurted when he saw Eleanor. "Everyone's still talking about her performance. They'll be comparing me to her." "Stop that," Eleanor said firmly. "You're not in competition with Ms. Suarez. You're a 16-year-old student. She's a professional with decades of experience. Just play your best. That's all anyone expects." Thomas took a deep breath and nodded. When his name was announced, he walked onto the stage with his shoulders back, exactly as Eleanor had taught him. His performance of the Beethoven Appassionata was the best Eleanor had ever heard from him, not technically perfect, but played with genuine emotion and commitment. When he finished, the audience gave him an enthusiastic standing ovation, recognizing both his talent and his courage in following such a tough act. Eleanor felt a surge of pride as she watched him take his bows. When he came off stage, she squeezed his shoulder. "Well done, truly." After the final performance, a flute and piano duet by two graduating seniors, Dean Richards took the stage to thank everyone for attending. As the audience began to file out, Eleanor hurried back to the green room only to find it empty. Panic fluttered in her chest. Where had Maria gone? Had she slipped away to avoid the reporter? Or worse, had she encountered the man in the dark suit? Eleanor rushed toward the stage door, intending to check the parking lot when she heard voices from the main auditorium. She backtracked and peered through the door. Maria stood center stage, alone except for the man in the dark suit who had made his way to the front row. They appeared to be speaking in their native language, their voices too low for Eleanor to hear clearly. Without thinking, Eleanor pushed through the door and marched down the aisle. "Maria," she called out. "Is everything all right?" Both Maria and the man turned to look at her. Up close, Eleanor could see that he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his 60s with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. "Yes," Maria said, switching to English. "Everything is fine, Eleanor. This is Pavel Ivanov. He was my professor at the conservatory many years ago." The man extended his hand to Eleanor with old-world formality. "Ms. Harwick, I presume. Maria speaks highly of you." Confused, Eleanor shook his hand automatically. "I thought, Maria, you said he worked for your government." "He did," Maria confirmed. "He was cultural attaché to our embassy in Vienna before the regime change. When the new government took power, he left the country like I did." "I have been searching for Maria for almost a year," Pavel explained. "Many of us from the conservatory have relocated to Vienna. We have established a small music academy there for exiles like ourselves. When I read about this showcase online and saw Maria's name, I had to come." Eleanor looked between them, still processing this unexpected turn of events. "So you're not here to... Maria isn't in danger?" Pavel smiled sadly. "No more danger than any exile. The current regime has more pressing concerns than tracking down pianists, though they would not welcome us back." He turned to Maria. "But we have found a new home in Vienna, and we need teachers, especially those who understand what our students have experienced." Maria's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "You're offering me a position?" "The academy is small," Pavel cautioned. "The pay is modest, but it is work worthy of your talents, and you would be among friends again." Eleanor felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that Maria was safe, happiness at this opportunity for her, but also an unexpected sense of loss. After 6 weeks of working together, she had grown accustomed to Maria's presence in her life. "You should accept," Eleanor said, forcing brightness into her voice. "It's a wonderful opportunity." Maria studied her face. "Perhaps. But I have commitments here too. Cleaning floors?" Eleanor shook her head. "That's not a commitment. That's survival." Pavel cleared his throat. "I will leave you two to discuss this. Maria, I'm staying at the hotel downtown. Here is my card with the number. I return to Vienna in 3 days." He bowed slightly to both women and left the auditorium. When they were alone, Maria sat on the edge of the stage, her feet dangling. "What would you do?" she asked Eleanor. "If you were me?" Eleanor joined her on the stage. "I'd go to Vienna in a heartbeat. To teach music again, to be among other musicians from your homeland, how could you not?" "And what about Westfield?" "What about it?" Eleanor laughed without humor. "You're the janitor here, Maria. They don't value you for your talent." "You did," Maria said quietly. "Eventually." Eleanor fell silent, unable to argue with the truth of those words. She had initially dismissed Maria based solely on her position, only to discover the extraordinary person behind the job title. Dean Richards mentioned you might be offered a teaching position here, Maria continued. After my performance today, I think that's likely. At a fraction of what you're worth, Eleanor pointed out. And with people like Richards using your story for publicity, you deserve better, Maria smiled slightly. So you're saying I should go to Vienna? Yes. The word came out more forcefully than Eleanor had intended. Yes, you should go. I will consider it, Maria promised. But first I believe there's a reporter waiting to interview me. Shall we face him together? 3 months later, Eleanor sat in her classroom listening to a new student struggle through a Clementi sonatina. The girl was talented but impatient, rushing through the difficult passages rather than taking the time to play them correctly. Slower, Eleanor instructed for the 3rd time. Accuracy first, then speed. The girl sighed but dutifully began again, playing with exaggerated slowness that made Eleanor hide a smile. The new school year had just begun, and Eleanor was still adjusting to her expanded teaching schedule. 3 new students and an advanced theory class that she'd never expected to teach. When the lesson ended, Eleanor checked her watch. Just enough time for a cup of tea before her next student arrived. As she filled the electric kettle she kept in her room, there was a knock at her open door. A woman stood in the doorway, dressed not in a gray uniform but in a stylish blue dress, her dark hair cut in a fashionable bob that took years off her appearance. Maria! Eleanor set down the kettle and crossed the room. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Vienna. I was, Maria confirmed, stepping into the classroom, for the summer program. But now I'm back. She gestured to the hallway where a box of books sat on a dolly. To teach. Full-time. Eleanor stared at her in confusion. But the position in Vienna, your friend's there. The position is still open, Maria said. Pavel understands my decision. Vienna will be there when I'm ready. She looked around the classroom, at the piano where they had spent so many hours practicing, at the window where Eleanor had stood listening to her play. But for now, this feels right. Why? Eleanor asked, genuinely puzzled. Why choose Westfield over Vienna? Maria smiled, the same transformative smile Eleanor had seen backstage after her performance. Because here I have something to build. Something new. She paused. And because here, there is someone who taught me that talent deserves nurturing, even when it comes in unexpected packages. Eleanor felt her throat tighten at hearing her own words quoted back to her. Besides, Maria added, Dean Richards made quite a generous offer after that article came out. My studio is down the hall from yours. She glanced at her watch. And my first student arrives in 15 minutes. As Maria turned to retrieve her box of books, Eleanor called after her, Have dinner with me tonight. To celebrate your first day, Maria looked back, her eyes warm. I'd like that, but only if you let me cook. After all, I've heard what your students say about your cooking skills when they think no one is listening. Eleanor laughed, a full, genuine laugh that echoed down the hallway. It's a deal. Welcome to Westfield, Professor Suarez.